Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
This is a story that I never thought I'd have to tell. I'm Nina and I'm 28 years old, and several months ago, I found myself in a situation that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. I met Kevin when I was new to my company. He worked in the IT department while I worked in a different department on another floor. Our paths crossed when I had to get my company-issued laptop set up. Kevin was one of the ID guys responsible for onboarding new employees. He was charming, funny, and he made me feel at ease in a new environment. We hit it off almost immediately, and after a few casual conversations, he asked me out on a date. To be exact, we went out on 3 dates before deciding to make it official. I know how it sounds. Just know that I was lonely and it was hard for me to find a guy that I would like. So when I found Kevin, I didn't mind jumping into a relationship so quickly. The first couple of weeks were great. It was filled with the typical new relationship energy. However, it didn't take long for our differences to show. Well, 2 months exactly. Kevin and I had fundamental differences that we just couldn't work out. For one, he didn't like animals, which was a huge deal breaker for me. I have 2 dogs and 3 cats, and they are like family to me. At first, I just thought that Kevin wasn't used to animals, but his disdain for my pets was clear as day, and he often complained about the cost and attention that they required. Well, the final straw came one night when he casually suggested that I should consider giving them away or abandoning them, especially if we ever got serious and decided to get married. This was a conversation that he brought up 2 months into the relationship. Well, that was it for me. I couldn't be with someone who didn't love and respect my pets as I did. So, I ended it that same day. Looking back at it now, I'm actually glad that he showed his true colors so early into the relationship. Anyway, the breakup itself wasn't messy. There was no shouting matches or cruel words exchanged. Kevin did push back a bit, but ultimately he accepted. I also didn't worry about seeing him at work since we were on different floors and we rarely crossed paths. Life went back to normal after the breakup. I focused on my work, spent time with my pets, and then went out with friends. However, a couple of weeks later, I received a text message from Kevin. He asked me to meet him at a specific area of the park that we used to visit together. He said that he just wanted to talk. I didn't think much of it at that time. I figured that he might want to talk things over or ask to get back together. I wasn't interested in rekindling the relationship, but I thought that it would be kind to explain things to him in person, calmly and rationally. But as the date approached, I started to feel uneasy. I don't know why, but something about the situation didn't sit right with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that I might be in danger. Trusting my instincts, I called my older brother and explained the whole situation to him. Let me tell you about my brother. My brother is a tall, strong guy who is very active in sports and weightlifting. He's the kind of person who can intimidate most people with just his presence, but he's actually a caring and sweet man. My brother then suggested that he would go with me. He said that he will keep a bit of distance, so we still have our privacy, but he wants to be able to keep an eye on me just in case that things go south. On the night of our meetup, my brother picked me up and we drove to the park. We were running late for some reason that I can clearly remember now. I told my brother the exact location, and he dropped me off near the spot while he went to find parking. I hurried to the bench where Kevin and I used to sit. But when I got there, Kevin wasn't around yet, so I just sat on the bench waiting for him. I noticed how eerily quiet and empty the park was. I never went to the park at that hour, so I never knew. But suddenly, I heard some rustling behind me. I turned around and I see 3 men emerging from the trees behind the bench. They had masks covering their mouths and they stared at me intensely. My heart sank and a wave of nausea hit me. It didn't take long to realize that this was a trap set up by Kevin. I started to panic, unsure of what to do, and the men closed in and I felt utterly helpless. And just then, I heard a booming voice yell, "Who the hell are you guys? Get the hell away from my sister!" It was my brother. He was running towards us, and the sight of his massive, intimidating frame must have freaked the men out. They hadn't expected anyone else to be there, let alone someone who could easily overpower them. They took off running, disappearing into the darkness. To be honest, in my panic state, I even forgot my brother was there. But I thank whatever stars I have that he was there and that I listened to my gut feeling a couple of days ago. I ran to my brother and then we got out of there as quickly as possible. My brother then drove me back home and we talked about what had happened. We debated calling the cops but ultimately decided against it, thinking that we didn't have enough proof that it was Kevin who orchestrated the whole thing. But deep down, I knew it was him. Looking back, I realized how foolish I was to meet him in the first place, but I had no idea that he was capable of something so horrible. A few days after the incident, I found out that Kevin had quit the company and no one knew where he was. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. I was relieved but also scared, knowing that he was out there somewhere. I thank God for my brother, because I don't know what would have happened to me if he hadn't been there. I still get nightmares about that night, imagining what could have happened if my brother hadn't shown up in time. So, to everyone, all I can say is listen to that inner voice that tells you that something isn't right. I was just a sophomore in high school, and I fell head over heels for the new quiet kid, and thought that he was my forever. Crazy, but I would actually go on marrying down the road just 1 week after graduation. High school sweethearts. Looking back now, I can see how many red flags I noticed but ignored because I was young and eagerly wanting to be grown up. Well, fast forward, the night before my wedding day, I was going over last-minute wedding details with my mom, who is easily one of the most caring and selfless people that I know. So bless my sweet mama's heart when I asked her if she'd be mad if I decided that I didn't want to go through with the wedding. The wedding was the next day, but me being me, and Mom thought that I was messing with her, I couldn't tell her the truth of what was going on now. So I took a deep breath and I forced a believable chuckle. She genuinely thought that I was just pulling another one of my jokes. I went on to finally tell her the truth almost a year after I escaped him, and she still feels bad for not taking it seriously. No one knew what was going on behind closed doors, but makes sense. I was honestly his biggest PR team. Only 2 hours passed since saying I do's. He was throwing me out of the truck in my parents' driveway, cussing and yelling that he wanted a divorce. He was then recklessly driving off. So much for all that honeymoon phase on our actual honeymoon. I ran inside and my dad came out of the bedroom, and he couldn't understand a word that I was saying, but he is trying to basically ask me what was happening, and I say it as clear as I could while uncontrollably sobbing. He left me. How could he? On our honeymoon. My dad is pissed, but then he relaxed and tried to rationalize the situation. Like maybe he forgot something, or pulling a bad joke or something like that. And then we see his truck flying in our driveway, and my dad smiles and says, "See, he's right there." I wipe my tears and I walk out of the door and tell them yes, that it was a prank. But inside I was screaming. I was so embarrassed for myself because now I looked crazy. But if I wanted to save this relationship, they could never know the truth. Months go by and he starts being sweeter ever since we had to be in a long-distance relationship because he was in the military at training. But soon, I would be packing up my life and moving to Texas with him. I could tell that my parents were starting to see the cracks that I had worked so hard to glue together. My mom even picked up my phone on the table, mistaking it for hers, and saw this huge message from my ex, crying and begging me to stay because he was not a good person. But I assured her that this was way out of character for him, which was a lie, and that he was just lonely. I knew that she didn't believe me, but she also knew that I was stubborn and I was going to do whatever regardless of her concerns. After just a few weeks in Texas, I knew my life was in danger. It was Thanksgiving that day, and my family just called to check up on us and just tell us happy Thanksgiving. And the moment that I hung up, the man that I thought was my soulmate just started cussing at me and saying that I need to stop talking to my family because he was my only family now. I let out a little chuckle thinking that he's gotta be joking. And then he picks up our wedding glasses, which I specifically had made for us, and then he throws it directly at me, shattering around me. Shocked, I didn't know what to do, so I walked over to the broom and I just start sweeping up the broken glass. You may read this and think, surely he would be done throwing a tantrum by now, right? But no. He then throws pictured frames at me while I'm sweeping up the glass. Honestly, that broken glass on the wooden floor was just a metaphor for any love that I had left towards this man. I broke that night, and I stopped seeing him as my other half, and more as the monster that I'm now stuck with. I became very depressed, and he loved that. He would break me down over and over again just to get a reaction. 2 months go by, and one night, he completely lost his shit over the washer and dryer people messing up the days that they were supposed to come out, and he started pacing back and forth mumbling words that I couldn't quite make out. But then he demanded that I call and fix it. He grabbed me and sat me on the couch telling me what to say and that I better not fuck it up, like a damn negotiation. This man was paranoid as hell, making comments that they were doing it because he was a soldier. And then he started blaming me, even though I wasn't even around him when he called the place in the first place. But he still yelled at me for hours. He walked to the bedroom, and I'm still on the couch still processing that moment. He said, "You're so stupid. This is all your fault. Did you plan this with the workers just to make me look dumb? Or are you really just that dumb? Huh? You bitch?" That's what I fucking thought. You're no good. You're just an ungrateful bitch. I said, "You know what? I'm done. You won't do anything except complain and bitch at me, blaming me for everything, and all you do is cuss and yell at me for no damn reason." He looked at me with this look that I've heard other victims try and describe, and the best that I can describe it is a darkness in his eyes, like an emptiness that still causes me nightmares to this day. And without hesitation, he lunges at me in the middle of the day with our curtains open, with our door wide open, and our neighbors out and about. He then throws me against the wall and starts choking me. I slowly see black, but then he lets go for a second because then he slammed my entire body to the floor. At that moment, I either blacked out or my brain was trying to shield myself from what was happening. But piece by piece, I would come to, and he was holding me by my shoulders and just repeatedly slamming me on the wooden floor. My screams ignored by the people outside, and I pleaded for anyone to call the police, and I repeated yelling for help over and over and over again. My fight or flight takes over and then chooses flight. I run to the main bathroom, and I lock the door, frantically calling my mom because I'm in that moment that I just wanted to hear her voice. Unsure if that would be my last. But my poor mom didn't know the nightmare of that phone call until it was too late. She was with my sister and dad, and then she put me on speakerphone because we usually do this so they can all talk to me like we were all there together. But instead, they hear me screaming for my life and hear my ex calling me awful names and telling me to get my ass in there and to unlock the door. They were so confused, and my dad was ready to come and kill this asshole himself. But then silence. No more banging, just me softly crying and just trying to calm my mother over the phone that I am all right and that I know that I need to leave him, but that I had to do it in the safest way possible because if he were to catch me, I may not make it out with my life. When I walk out of the room, my ex is just sitting there with a blank stare like nothing had happened. There was a theme throughout our 3-year relationship, but I could no longer ignore the escalation of his behavior. So one night, I finally put my escape plan into action. I was gonna make a run for it. It was 2 a.m. Keys to my Pontiac were on the kitchen table, and he was asleep in the bedroom that I wasn't allowed in several days earlier. I then busted out of the guest bedroom that was my prison, and then I beelined out the front door quietly, but also as quickly as possible. 9.5 hours to my home state, and I only stopped once in Dallas to fill up on gas. With every mile in my rearview mirror, I felt something inside that reassured me. I'm free now. Forever scared, but most have healed or faded. I 100% believe that if I have stayed, I would be 6 feet deep now. So, to my abusive ex-husband that I fled from that late February night, let's not meet again, ever. So my senior year of high school, I dated this guy. Let's call him Tom. We dated for over a year. The relationship was not good. We were always breaking up and then getting back together. We were fighting a lot, and he also threatened me a lot. It was just overall very toxic. His parents also had a very rocky relationship. His dad was an alcoholic and beat on his mom most nights. I even witnessed it when I spent the night there on rare occasions. It was scary. And toward the end of the senior year, Tom cheated on me at his birthday party. So again, we broke up, and months later we tried to get back together. But I just realized that I just didn't like him anymore, and I called it quits for good. That was 15 years ago, and that was the last time that I saw him. I've since heard that he became an alcoholic just like his dad, that he became very violent, and he wound up in a mental hospital. I wasn't sure on the details on this, but I had heard that he might be schizophrenic. 9 years ago, I met my now husband. We've been happily married for 4 years and have a 2-year-old and another one on the way. Maybe about a year ago now, I got a random text message asking my name. I get work calls and texts on my personal phone, so I just answered, "Yes?" And they wrote back, "How are you?" I should mention that I've had the same number since high school. I just didn't respond because I didn't know who it was, and at this point I figured that it wasn't something having to do with work. But then, a few minutes later, I got another text that said, "It's Tom. How are you?" When I tell you, I absolutely gasped. I responded, "I'm well. I hope you are too." He then wrote again and asked, "What are you doing?" Again, I didn't respond. A minute later, I get a follow-up message from him that said, "Do you ever think about us? Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we were still together? Do you ever think about getting back together?" I sat in silence rereading these messages, unsure of how to respond. I finally just replied and said, "I'm sorry, Tom, but no, I'm married now, and I wish you the best, but I don't think we should have any form of communication." He just responded with okay and apologized. I thought that it was weird, but whatever. Maybe the dude was lonely and decided to reach out, but who knows. Last week, his mother showed up at my family business. I've worked here since high school in different roles. She and his father had gotten a divorce, and she now has a boyfriend that she seems happy with. We exchanged pleasantries, and then she asked me, "Did you hear about Tom? He was in an institution." I said that I'd heard and that I was sorry to hear it. She said, "Well, he killed several animals, and that's why they ended up locking him up." Again, I said that I was sorry to hear that, but then she said, "Yeah, but he's out now. He's been for a while. You know, you were always my favorite girlfriend he had. Do you ever still think about him?" I wasn't sure what to say to this. I wanted to say, "Lady, that was in high school. No." Instead, I just said, "No, I'm married now with a toddler. I don't have much time to think about anything else." I guess I was just trying to lighten the mood. But she then said, "You know, he's not a bad guy. I don't see him that much anymore, but when I do, he still talks about you. He wonders what could have been. Would you ever be open to talking to him?" Well, that's when I shut things down. I told her that it was great to see her, but that option was off the table now and forever. I then said that I had to get back to work, and I walked away and hid in the back until she left. I mean, what the actual fuck? This high school relationship was years ago. I want no part of him or his family. I'm just sincerely hoping that he doesn't pop up at my place of work. I have no idea if he's still around the area, but I really, really hope that he isn't. Anyway, bizarre old high school boyfriend, let's not meet again. Hi everyone, my name is Chris and I'm 25 and male. I'm here to tell you about a terrifying and somewhat embarrassing story that I have. Please forgive me if I write some things a bit weirdly. I'm really not the best when it comes to writing. Anyway, let's start the story. Falling in love with Samantha, who was 22 and female, was like a dream come true. We met at a mutual friend's party, and from that night on, it felt like we were inseparable. She was everything that I have ever wanted. She was kind, thoughtful, and beautiful. Our relationship was the epitome of what you would call healthy and beautiful. We took care of each other, we shared our dreams, and we made plans for the future. After dating for a year, we decided to take the next step and then move in together. I know, some of you might think that it was too fast, but for me, I couldn't wait to just be with her all the time. Those first few months were nothing short of magical. We did everything as a couple, cooking meals together, We had weekend getaways, and we were cuddling up for movie nights. We spent lazy Sundays in our jammies. We were playing board games and, just enjoying each other's company. It really felt like a perfect match. Like everything had just fallen into place. It felt like I have finally met the one that I was going to spend the rest of my life with. But as time went on, something shifted. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone had flipped a switch. By the 7th month of living together, the dynamic between us had completely changed. We stopped caring about each other in the way that we used to. Where there had been once love and affection, there was now apathy and irritation. It happened so suddenly that it was jarring. We started getting annoyed with each other's presence, snapping at the smallest things. I couldn't stand the way she left her shoes in the hallway, and she hated the way that I absent-mindedly left dishes in the sink. Our once cozy home turned into a battleground, if I may say, and every little annoyance became a reason for a screaming match between the two of us. Intimacy completely vanished. We went from being a couple who couldn't keep their hands off each other to barely acknowledging each other's presence. There were days when we wouldn't even speak to each other at all. The silence between us was just heavy and suffocating. I don't know why we stayed together despite the obvious signs that it was over. Maybe it was just because neither of us knew how to end it. Or maybe it was the looming specter of our lease that had just a couple of months left. We were both just waiting it out, I guess, hoping to avoid the discomfort of a breakup until the lease was up. But everything came to a head one day when we fought over something as trivial as dishes in the sink. The argument escalated quickly, and we started another screaming match with each other. And in the heat of the moment, I thought to myself, "Oh God, I hate this woman." And that was when it clicked for me. I couldn't continue being in a relationship where I harbored these kinds of thoughts. I told her that we should end it, and she agreed. We decided to just wait for the lease to be up, but I already moved my stuff to the spare bedroom that night. We hadn't spoken a word for a week after that. Living in the same space with someone you once loved but now couldn't stand was a new kind of torture. One day, I was feeling bored and somewhat lonely, so I decided to download a dating app. I was already single. I wasn't looking for anything serious, just some people to chat with. I matched with a few women and I started talking to them. But there was this one girl that I really connected with. We hit it off and we decided to take our conversation out of the app. We exchanged numbers and started talking on the phone, sometimes for hours. It was refreshing to have a friendly voice to talk to, a distraction from the tense atmosphere that I had at home. Do take note that during my relationship with Samantha, I have never cheated on her, nor did I ever think that she cheated on me. This all happened weeks after me and Samantha finally called quits on the relationship. One night, while I was on the phone with the new girl in my room, I heard a loud banging on my door. It startled me. It wasn't a normal kind of banging. It sounded like someone was using a heavy object to hit the door. So I ended the call abruptly. And then came the yelling. It was Samantha. She was screaming and calling me names. She accused me of cheating on her, her voice filled with rage and hysteria. The noise was deafening. I could hear things breaking outside my door, glass shattering, objects crashing to the floor. And despite being a man, I knew that I didn't have the strength to stop Samantha in her state. I was just horrified. I genuinely thought that I was going to get hurt that night. So I did the only logical thing that I could think of, and that was to call the police. They arrived within minutes. thanks to a neighbor who had already called them after hearing the commotion. The neighbors actually called in for a noise complaint. The officers came in and then detained Samantha until she calmed down. 2 officers spoke to her while one talked to me, and I explained everything, my voice shaking as I recounted the ordeal. To be honest, in my head, I was terrified that Samantha would make up lies and blame everything on me, but luckily she didn't. After everything was sorted out, I decided to just leave that night. The police waited while I packed my things and I loaded everything into my car. As I drove away, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. I stopped by a gas station to buy some snacks and I called my parents to explain what had happened. They were understanding and offered to let me move back in with them. I then blocked Samantha on all my social media accounts and I changed my phone number. Thankfully, she didn't try to contact me again. The entire experience left me shaken, and I just knew that I wouldn't be dating anyone anytime soon. So, to Samantha, the woman that I once loved, who turned my life into a nightmare, I hope that I never see you again. The creepy guy I dated for a while is a murderer. As a teenager, I waited tables in a local restaurant to pay for the gas for my car. That's where I met Mr. Creep, let's call him that. In my naive mind, he seemed normal at first, despite the fact that he was 20 and wanting to date a 17-year-old. Leaving my job after dark scared me, so I taught myself to get in my car, shut the door, and lock it in one fluid motion, and it made me feel safe. One night, while I was leaving work, I had just gotten into my car when Mr. Creep seemed to just appear out of nowhere, yanking my door handle to try and open it. I looked into his eyes in the split second before he smiled, and what I saw absolutely chilled my bones. I don't know how to describe the evil that I saw. I just rolled down the window a crack and then faked a laugh when he said something about wanting to see if he could scare me, and then I just used my curfew as an excuse to get away. From then on, I was terrified of him, but I didn't let on because I was afraid of what he might do if I told him that I never wanted to see him again. After this, he constantly lied to try to impress me and try to invent ways of being alone with me, but my instinct was to run, so I tried my best to avoid him. About 2 weeks after this incident, the restaurant got robbed, and there was significant evidence against Mr. Creep, but it was just not the kind that allowed the cops to charge him. I tried sending all of my text conversations with Mr. Creep to the police chief in hopes that it would help. But Mr. Creep just slithered away after that, and I always had to look over my shoulder. About 5 years ago, he messaged me on Facebook out of the blue. He went on about his top secret military clearance, as well as a huge acreage he owned. It made me nervous, and I felt like he was trying to spring a trap or something, but I tried to put it out of my mind. And then today, I was looking at posts about an unsolved murder when I saw his mugshot. He is now facing murder charges as well as 2 other violent felony charges. I am so glad to know that he's locked up now, but I am so overwhelmed about how correct my instincts were about Mr. Creep. I feel like I escaped him. My name is Matthew, and I'm 30 years old. I met Kimberly when I was 26. We were introduced through a mutual friend, Richard, who had been my best friend since college. Kimberly and I had an instant connection, the kind that you read about in novels. We were that couple who finished each other's sentences and shared inside jokes that made others feel like outsiders. It was even so cheesy to the point where I can't even believe it. Richard, who was also 26 at that time, was incredibly supportive of our relationship. He seemed genuinely happy for us, often joining us for outings and gatherings, and I valued his friendship deeply. He was like a brother to me. For a long time, it felt like I was living in a dream. Kimberly, Richard, and I formed a close-knit trio. We spent countless weekends together, hiking, dining out, and even vacationing as a group. My life literally felt perfect. But perfect never lasts, and I was too blinded by love to see the cracks forming beneath the surface. The first signs of trouble were small, almost insignificant. Kimberly started making quirky comments about how Richard and I had such a strong friendship. She would say things like, "You two are practically inseparable," with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. At that time, I thought she was just being playful. But these comments became more frequent, and gradually, they took on a more critical tone. She started suggesting that Richard didn't respect our relationship and that he was a bad influence on me. I brushed off her concerns, thinking that she was just being overly protective. Richard had been my friend for years, and I couldn't imagine him having any ill intentions. But Kimberly's words planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I began to analyze Richard's actions more critically, looking for any signs of disrespect or betrayal. And this was just the beginning of a manipulation that I didn't yet recognize. It wasn't long before Kimberly's influence began to affect my behavior. I started declining Richard's invitations to hang out, choosing instead to spend time with Kimberly alone. She would often claim that she felt uncomfortable when Richard was around, saying that he made her feel like a third wheel. I wanted to make her happy, so I distanced myself from Richard, thinking that it was the right thing to do for my relationship. Months passed, and my social circle began to shrink. Friends who had once been close seemed distant, wary even. Kimberly always had an explanation though. She would tell me that they were jealous of our relationship or that they had said things behind my back. I trusted her completely and I took her words at face value. Confronting my friend seemed unnecessary. After all, Kimberly was the woman that I loved. As my friendships deteriorated, my dependence on Kimberly increased. She became my entire world, the only person that I felt that I could trust. But as our relationship deepened, so did the manipulation. She started questioning my memory, insisting that I had said or done things that I couldn't recall. Simple disagreements turned into elaborate blame games, with her always emerging as the victim. I seriously began to doubt my own sanity, relying on her perception of events rather than my own. Richard tried to intervene a few times, expressing concern about my relationship with Kimberly. But his words fell on deaf ears. I saw his attempts as meddling, convinced by Kimberly that he was trying to sabotage our happiness. My once close friend became a stranger to me, someone that I viewed with suspicion and resentment. The isolation was complete when Kimberly suggested that we move in together. She painted a picture of a perfect life, just the two of us, free from the negativity of others. I, of course, agreed, thinking that it would strengthen our relationship and bring us closer. But moving in only magnified the problems. Kimberly's control over my life became more apparent. She monitored my activities, questioned my interactions, and she criticized my own decisions. I felt trapped, but I couldn't see a way out. One day, while I was cleaning a drawer of mine, I found a group photo from a few years back. It was taken during one of our outings with Richard and a few other friends. Looking at that photo, I felt sad. I realized how much I missed my friends and the carefree times that we had shared. It was a moment of clarity, just a brief escape from the fog of manipulation that had clouded my mind. So I secretly decided to reach out to Richard. It was a hesitant, tentative step, driven by a longing for the friendship that we once had. I wasn't sure if Richard was going to accept me, given all the things that I have done to him. But to my surprise, he was receptive. He listened without judgment as I poured out my confusion and my doubts. He assured me that he had never said anything against me and that he had always wanted the best for me. His words were like a balm to my wounded soul, but they also amplified the realization of how much that I had lost. As I rekindled my friendship with Richard, Kimberly's behavior became more erratic. She sensed a change in my behavior and intensified her efforts to control me. The arguments escalated and her accusations became more severe. It was a really difficult time for me, but with Richard's support, I began to see the manipulation for what it was, and I started standing up for myself, questioning Kimberly's narratives and asserting myself. The breaking point came was when Kimberly learned that I reconnected with Richard, and then she accused Richard of trying to seduce her. It was an outrageous claim, one that shattered the final remnants of my trust in her. I confronted her for the first time, truly challenging her manipulations. Her facade crumbled, revealing the extent of her lies. The confrontation was messy and painful. Kimberly tried to turn the tables, playing the victim and accusing me of betraying her. But I was no longer blinded by her manipulation. I really did love Kimberly. But I found the strength to end the toxic relationship. It was difficult, one that left me feeling both free and heartbroken. The weeks that followed were a period of healing and self-discovery. Richard stood by me, helping me rebuild my life and reconnect with old friends. It was a slow process, and it was filled with a lot of moments of doubt and insecurity. My relationship with Richard grew stronger. He never once said, "I told you so." Instead, he supported me with unwavering loyalty and understanding. My other friendships gradually mended too, as people saw that I was working on my life and distancing myself from the toxic relationship. Looking back, I realized how easily I had fallen into the trap that Kimberly had set up for me. It was a humbling experience, one that taught me the importance of self-awareness and putting up healthy boundaries. Eventually, I moved to a new city. Of course, Richard and I and our other friends stayed in touch. Years passed, and I met someone new. This time, I approached the relationship with caution and self-awareness, mindful of the lessons that I had learned. And I could feel that this time, it was a healthy and genuine connection. No manipulation, no lies, and I felt a sense of peace. As I reflect on the past, I am grateful for the support of friends like Richard. Kimberly's manipulation had been a dark chapter in my life, but it doesn't define me. So, to Kimberly, I hope one day you reflect on yourself, maybe get some therapy if you think you need it. And to the others, thank you for reading this, but I just want to remind you to not throw away your friendship so easily, like I did. Life has a funny way of pushing you to your limits. And when I decided to move to a new city after a particularly ugly breakup, I thought that I was making a fresh start. Little did I know that the past has a way of creeping back into your life, no matter how far you run. I'm Lyra. I'm 27 and female. The relationship I had has been a roller coaster, filled with highs that made me feel invincible, and lows that left me questioning my sanity. When it finally ended, it wasn't mutual. It was messy, complicated, and filled with accusations and regrets. My ex, Mark, 28 and male, wasn't willing to let things go easily. The months following our breakup were filled with incessant calls, a lot of messages, and unexpected visits. I realized that I needed to create some distance from him and regain control over my life. It was just getting too toxic for me, and it was messing with my mental health. So, moving to a new city seemed like the best solution. I found a cozy one-bedroom apartment in a bustling neighborhood, complete with friendly neighbors and a sense of anonymity that was very refreshing. It has been a stressful couple of months, but the move was cathartic. It was a way to reclaim my life and my independence. For the first few months, everything was perfect. I found a new job, I made new friends, and for the first time in a long time, I finally felt like I was at peace. But then, it started very subtly. At first, I didn't think much of the small changes in my apartment. I'm naturally forgetful, so when I found my favorite coffee mug in a different cupboard or my keys on the kitchen counter instead of the hallway table, I chalked it up to my scatterbrained nature. But as time went on, these little inconsistencies became harder to ignore. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, I came home to find my living room window slightly ajar. I distinctly remember closing it that morning, as the weather forecast said that it was going to rain. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I dismissed it as my imagination just playing tricks on me. Maybe I had left it open and simply forgotten about it, and just thought that I closed it. But then, there were the messages. Mark had stopped trying to contact me directly after I moved, which was a relief, but I began receiving anonymous texts from an unknown number. Initially, they were innocuous, just generic greetings and questions about my day. But they quickly turned invasive. The sender seemed to know too much about my daily routine, my new friends, even the layout of my apartment. I blocked the number, but the messages continued from different numbers, almost as if the sender had unlimited resources to keep reaching out to me. It was really freaking me out. I started feeling watched. It was an unsettling sensation, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. I don't know if you've tried that before, but in my opinion, it's a horrible feeling. Every time that I would walk home from work, I would glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me. But there was never anyone there. It was just the city life, strangers going about their business, not knowing about my paranoia. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On my nightstand, next to my favorite book, was an old photo of Mark and me. It was from the happier times. It was a picture that I had torn up and thrown away before I moved. Seeing it there, perfectly intact, felt like a violation. It was a clear message. Mark had found me, and he had been in my apartment. I'm not stupid, so I went to the police directly with the photo and the couple text messages that I haven't erased yet. But with no concrete evidence to prove that it was Mark, there was little that they could do. So I tried doing the logical step. I changed my locks, I hired a locksmith, and I felt a brief sense of security. But the feeling was short-lived. The next time that I came home, I found another photo. This one of me sleeping, taken from the inside of my apartment. The realization that Mark had a key, again, to my new place despite the lock change was terrifying. I didn't understand how he could do this. Every creak of my old apartment now felt like a potential threat to me. I started sleeping with a chair wedged against the bedroom door. My phone was always clutched tightly in my hand. My friends even noticed the change in me. They were asking me all the time if everything was all right, but I was somewhat too embarrassed to admit the truth. So I just kept it to myself. It just felt like if I admit it out loud, then it made everything too real. And part of me wanted to believe that it was all in my head, that maybe I'm just too paranoid, or maybe I'm just going crazy. The tension reached its peak one rainy night when I had just settled into bed, the sound of the rain pattering against the window like a soothing backdrop. When I heard it, a faint click. It was the sound of my front door opening. I almost didn't hear it because of the rain, but I think I was just hyper aware all the time, and that's why I was able to catch that sound. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear. My breath caught in my throat. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, and they made their way down the hallway. I knew it was Mark. I mean, who else could it be? The intruder moved, like they know the exact layout of my apartment, like they've been there multiple times before. It was great that I already had my phone on me, so with trembling hands, I dialed 911 and I whispered my situation to the operator. I could hear the intruder moving closer. I stayed as quiet as possible, praying that the police would arrive in time. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door. The handle turned, but the chair wedged against it held firm. There was a moment of silence followed by a frustrated grunt. The intruder tried the handle again, shaking the door violently. And a couple of minutes later, I heard it. The sound of the sirens in the distance was the most beautiful thing that I have ever heard. In that moment, the intruder must have heard them too, because the door handle stopped rattling and I heard hurried footsteps retreating. By the time the police arrived, the apartment was empty and the front door stood open, rainwater pooling on that welcome mat. The police found no trace of the intruder and no signs of forced entry. They took my statement and promised to patrol the area more frequently, and they just told me to call them back if something happens. But I knew that wasn't enough. Mark was so determined, and as long as he knew where I lived, I would never be safe. So, I chose the hard route. I decided to move again. This time, without telling anyone except my immediate family. I found a new apartment in a different part of the city, and I changed my phone number. And I deactivated all my social media accounts. The process was exhausting, both physically and emotionally. I was being drained from everything that was happening to me, and I didn't know what to do. I felt helpless. For a while, things seemed to improve. The messages stopped, and there were no more signs of Mark's presence. So I kind of started to relax, letting my guard down, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But then, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I received a package. It was simple, a small brown box with no return address. My curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. Inside was a single item. Another photo of me sleeping, taken from the inside of my new apartment. Panic just washed over me, and I just fell down on the floor and started bawling my eyes. Despite all my efforts, Mark had found me again. I realized then that I couldn't keep running. Mark's obsession had become a dangerous game of cat and mouse, one that I was tired of playing. I didn't want to do this anymore. So I contacted the police again, this time providing them with every piece of evidence that I had collected. The photos, the messages, everything. They took my case more seriously, assigning an officer to check on me regularly. Days passed, and I haven't heard anything from Mark. The days turned into weeks, and while I remained on edge, there were no further signs. The serious police presence seemed to deter him. Perhaps he had finally realized that his behavior would land him in serious trouble. I also don't know why I didn't think of this before, but one good friend of mine suggested putting cameras all over the place, in the front door, inside my apartment, just to make sure that if he ever comes inside again, I can catch proof of him and I can finally have evidence to use against him. But months passed without incident. I started going to therapy. My therapist helped me understand that Mark's actions were not my fault and that I deserved to live without fear. I think going to therapy was really helpful. I made new friends, I reconnected with the old ones, and I even started dating again. Each step felt like a victory. Yet, in the back of my mind, there was always a shadow of doubt, a lingering fear that Mark would suddenly resurface again. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I noticed a man standing across the street, partially concealed by the shadows. But when I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't Mark. It was just a stranger, someone who had no interest in me. The realization was a small victory, a reminder that not every shadow held a threat against me. As time went on, the fear slowly went away and I learned to trust again, to let people into my life without the constant worry of betrayal. I still took precautions, of course, changing my locks regularly, being mindful of my surroundings, having cameras around my house, but I no longer let the fear control me. Years passed and I finally built a life for me. I got married, I have children now, and I found a career that I am passionate about. This happened years ago, and the only reason why I'm writing about this now is because the other day, I received a letter. An old friend passed it to me and said that it was from Mark. It was handwritten, and it was filled with apologies and explanations. He claimed to have changed, to have found redemption and a new purpose in life. He begged for my forgiveness, hoping to close the chapter on his own terms. I read the letter once, then twice, and finally, I just tore it up and threw it away. Mark had taken enough from me. He didn't deserve my forgiveness or my time. I had moved on, and I wasn't about to let him back into my life even in the smallest way. So, to Mark, my crazy ex-boyfriend, who haunted my life for so long, I hope we would never meet again. And here's the riddle for this video. Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.